justified because the justification indicated that the Attorney General reviewed the document. Is that correct, Mr. Sablan?
Well, after I signed it, after the Secretary of Finance certified the funding, the availability of funds, it goes up to the Attorney General. His signature, I think his signature attests that the contract is okay.
Well, Secretary of Finance certifies that the funds are available. That's their role.
Right.
The Attorney General's office, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Carney. Mr. Carney, finally got it right. The AG's office reviews it for form and legal sufficiency. Is that, or is there another legal term?
I believe it's legal capacity.
Legal capacity. Thank you. And just so we know, Mr. Carney, legal capacity means
whether this contract can be entered into under does the government have the capacity to enter into this contract?
Thank you.
Basically, have all the proper procedures been used?
Thank you. But you know, they have their roles in signing off on the contract. Mr. Sablan, what is Procurement and Supplies' role to sign off or not to sign off? What do you review it for?
For compliance with the procurement regulations. For compliance with the procurement regulations.
And for the benefit of the members, what do the procurement regulations say about sole source contracts?
That only one individual can do the project or supply the services.
Would you like to add to that, Mr. Carney?
Yeah, there's also circumstances involving emergencies. We spoke about this yesterday. It would be helpful if we had the procurement regulations in front of us. Unfortunately, we didn't, for various reasons, didn't understand that there was going to be a testimony, Mr. Sablan's testimony today, so we're honestly not quite prepared to answer all those questions in very specifics. But the procedure usually is that when there's a sole source, there's a justification for doing a sole source, and then if it meets the requirements for sole source, then that's given the go-ahead. I think there are some other issues. It's not the job of procurement and supply to enforce some of the regulations pertaining to anti-corruption statutes and clean government statutes. That's not really what procurement and supply does. So I understand that there was a justification written by the governor or someone in the governor's office, and I think as long as that met the requirements of the procurement regulations, then that's pretty much all that procurement and supply is involved with.
Thank you. But I'm primarily concerned about the procurement and supply regulations that guide procurement and supply to determine whether it meets those criteria or those regs or not. And you mentioned that, you know, in case of one of the justification for a sole source contract could be an emergency. Do you know if there was an emergency declaration that was issued that justified the sole source contract?
No.
I'm not aware of anything. I was not I was not with the Attorney General's office at the time this all happened, so I can't really say much on that sort of issues.
So yeah, I think the answer was no. There was no emergency declaration. But because you said in case of an emergency, they could sign it. So if there was an emergency declaration, they can sign it. If was the justification in it somewhere, because we haven't seen it yet, did it state that it was an emergency in the justification?
The justification doesn't have to be an emergency as long as it justifies the requirement of the services. I believe the contract will be okay to sign it.
You want to respond, Mr. Carter?
Yeah, if I may, I don't think the sole source procurement regs speak of an actual declaration of some sort of emergency. That's not necessarily required. It's I wish I had the regulations in front of me. I could be more specific. But where it's extremely important to get something done for various reasons, it may be funding issues, maybe other things, and it's an absolute requirement that this particular vendor be used. I think it's possible under the certain circumstances to use sole source, but I'm hesitant to say right now that that's a general rule. I'd have to see the procurement regs in front of me.
Actually, if a governor does declare a state of emergency, procurement and supply regulations are waived for all intents and purposes. The governor is given broad emergency powers, and one of those is that procurement and supply regs can be waived. Representative Sablan, did you have a question?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Tony Sablan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Sablan, good afternoon. No, I was just going to try to get a clarification again from legal counsel. I believe both yourself and Mr. Sablan have earlier stated that the procurement supply regulations surrounding sole source contracts that were primarily like two grounds that you in summary that there were primarily two grounds or justifications for signing off on a sole source contract.
The procurement regulations are available for anyone to see if they want to. It's Northern Mariana Islands Administrative Code 70-30.3. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist on the internet. There's various reasons for that. But I imagine there's a copy somewhere in the Capitol. I don't think, I'm hesitant to say anything without actually looking at the procurement regulations, having them in front of me, because I don't want to mislead
Can you turn on the mic?
I think that's very clear, and I understand that you'd rather not make comments without directly referencing the regulations. But I think Mr. Sablan in his response earlier mentioned that one was that is if there's only one vendor or one person who can provide the service or provide the product. The other one is the so-called emergency consideration are those without referencing word by word what's in the regs. Is that a general or a fair statement in regards to
Yeah, I think that's fair assessment. There's also
Chairman, point of order, please. I believe that Representative Sablan was addressing Mr. Sablan. If the legal counsel wishes to be recognized, he can do so by raising his hand. I noticed that a couple of times Mr. Sablan was asked of a question. The legal counsel is the one answering. And I saw that Mr. Sablan was about to answer the question. So if we can have some decorum, if you will, here, and be recognized if one needs to make a statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My fault. I should have mentioned that earlier. But please, you will be recognized. All you have to do is just raise your hand. I apologize. Vice Speaker, I didn't take note that you're raising your hand, but I'm not sure if Representative Sablan, who has the floor, is done.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and to avoid any further misunderstandings, let me direct my question to Mr. Sablan. Mr. Sablan, earlier upon questioning from the Chair, you mentioned that in consideration of a sole source contract, procurement and supply generally as a justification, one of the categories or one of the requirements for us in consideration of a justification is that when there's only one individual or firm that can provide the service of the product. So far, is that?
Is that what is the sources? But also, it can be justified, so that the what we call the project will not be delayed. It can be justified as a sole source. That's one advantage about the regulation. As long as there's justification, it can be sort of bent a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, I wish we have the regulations in front of us, but the reason I ask that is because there should be an established regulation that provides the rules of the game for everybody who wants to procure either services or products from the government. And I believe that those should be clear and defined, and that the procurement and supply should be well aware of what those rules of the games are for someone who's seeking a sole source contract. So I'm just asking what are in the books in regards to justifications that could be considered in the granting of or approval of a sole source contract, so that if we know those, then we can fall back and say, how does the justification attached to the sole source contract for IPS upon submittal to procurement and supply, how does that justification compare, or is it within the rules of the game provided for everybody? Mr. Sablan, do you want to respond?
I believe it is, Mr. Chairman.
Members, I want to call a short recess. I think we may have found the... Can I read this out, Council? Title 70, Department of Finance, 70-30.3-225, sole source procurement. Is that the regulations that deal with sole source contracts? I think you mentioned the regulations. I just read it out. Is it correct? Go ahead, Counsel.
I believe that's it, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a short recess and make copies for the members. Short recess. we resume our meeting after the short recess. I recognize Representative Sablan.
Thank you, Chair. I look at the packets just made available by Procurement and Supply, and according to Mr. Sablan and legal counsel, the justification, and I say that justification because the cover page for the particular section of the packets is entitled Sole Source, Justification, and Correspondence. But I find it odd that the mention of the prior to the first package of the justification section mentions the letter to the public auditor and the response to the response by the public auditor. And the public auditor, and then it's I'm not very clear on what the response of the public auditor, but the only thing there is I believe it's reading OPA suggests the proposed contract, and what is that? Am I not reading? I can't. Rationale for PSS. So upon the letter to OPA responded to the governor to forward it to OPA, and I believe the earlier statement was Mr. Sablan about is it the emergency part consideration of the contract and the threat of losing funds, were those the basis for your signing off on the contract, Mr. Sablan?
Yes, I signed the contract on the basis of the justification provided the governor.
And by emergency, I'm trying to get a clarification from you, and I'm assuming that if you were to go through the normal RFP process, that would add additional time. Is that what you're saying by emergency?
Not necessarily an emergency, but I guess an urgent requirement. Urgency, yes.
So let's say urgency, and generally, what would that take if you were to go through the normal procurement?
I guess it is very urgent that we do not cut off the administration of the ARRA funding.
Was there any information provided by the governor's office that such a threat was real? That if this contract wasn't signed as a source, bypassing the normal RFP process, that the funds, the ARRA funding, were being jeopardized or being risk, or be placed at risk of the CNMI losing those?
As I said before, Mr. Chairman, it takes a minimum of, at least per regulation, a minimum of 30 days for publication of or solicitation of a services of contract. And the governor doesn't want to lose not even one day to continue with the ARRA funding, administering the ARRA funding.
In that letter to you dated October 6, 2010, I believe it's the last paragraph. It reads, Mr. ARRA has extensive historical and current knowledge as well as non-public information of all ARRA funds. His clear advantage with the intricacies of the ARRA funds creates a distinct advantage should the CNMI government bid out the services according to procurement regulations. This would qualify or disqualify Mr. ARRA from participating in the bid, which he has a clear right to protest. Any potential protest from any party places at risk well over 90 million in federal funds and places a severe risk of loss of funding, which currently goes to funding critical service, and I think that's what you were referencing, or the governor was telling you that the government was at risk of losing those if we were to bypass or if we were to go through the normal RFP process. However, I find it surprising that this letter would even include these languages where it's clearly a violation or of CNMI Code of Ethics violation, and because this language says because of Mr. ARRA's involvement with the ARRA funding that he should be disqualified, and that comes directly from the governor's office. However, we jumped right over that statement and went ahead and say, well, you know, if he was to go through the RFP, he should be disqualified. But let's go through the sole source so he won't. I don't know how anyone can interpret that other than knowingly and intentionally breaking statute or the law. I'm surprised that language is even there. But Mr. Chairman, like I said, I have pressing.
Okay.
Are you at this time?
Thank you. I'd like to pose a question to the legal counsel and Mr. Sablan, whoever. Now that we have gotten a copy of the regs pertaining to sole source procurement, which part of the regs would cover the IPS sole source contract here? You have various criteria, I guess, under which certain sole source contracts could fall under, and you have it in front of you. So I mean, you would know better than us. Which one of these requirements would that contract or review of that contract or approval of that contract fall under?
I believe it falls under item 3.
Can you read that? Go ahead, Counsel.
Should I read it?
If you
Okay.
concur.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't involved in the decision, but I think there's an argument to be made that A3 could be used to justify it. It reads, to obtain professional services for the purpose of facilitating the process of obtaining needed critical infrastructure funding in order to harden and enhance the capability of protecting critical infrastructure of the Commonwealth. I suppose if you talk about the ARRA funding critical infrastructure and the services of Mr. Ada being professional services for the purposes of obtaining the needed funding for the infrastructure, I think there's a reasonable argument for using 3. I'll leave it at that.
Do you feel there are any other areas in the regs that it could fall under?
Chair, clarification.
Can I answer the question before you? Can you just maybe a yes or no, and if a yes, then which part? If not, then yes or no.
I don't think this is the only part.
Say again?
I believe item 3 is the only part that covers that justifies the contract.
Chair, what page is this that we're looking at in the regulations?
There's the first page, A3.
The first page?
It's in the copy of the regs that we had passed out very recently.
Oh, okay.
Counsel and Mr. Sablan, can you reference your memo approving the request for sole source contract?
This is stamp here.
Oh.
I don't think we could find the response in these materials from Mr. Sablan.
Yeah. So do you think it's missing, or do you think it exists but was just not here, or do you think there was none?
I normally stamp the justification approved. Unfortunately, I failed to do so in this issue.
So there is no. But in this case, we do have the governor's memo, or letter rather, of October 6, justifying the need for sole source contract, and there doesn't appear to be any stamp of approval on it. And that's why I was hoping for maybe a memo to the governor that would concur, and at least so we can get some reference as to that it was concurred on the basis of whatever procurement regs you referenced already, but there doesn't appear to be any. Thank you, Mr. Sablan. I yield to any member. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sablan, as the procurement and supply officer that signed the sole source contract, were you convinced at the time that you signed the contract that that contract was in order and that it was complete and that it can be signed?
Yes, Vice Chairman.
I'm referring to the letter of the governor to you justifying that sole source contract. Is that contract, did that communication satisfy you and serve as a basis for approving that contract?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
A follow-up question again goes back to in normal procurement process, how do you concur with any expenditure authority's justification for a sole source contract? What is the process that procurement and supply follows, that when somebody submits a request for or justifies a sole source contract, you may review it, and if you concur, what do you do? I think you already stated that you normally stamp it with your approval. Is that the process?
That is, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And I think the letter we have shown does not have a stamp of approval. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, but my signature to the contract, I believe, attests to the approval of the justification provided by the governor.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have to stamp the justification to approve the justification. You just sign the contract if you agree with the justification. Is that what you're saying now?
Not really, but I don't know why I didn't stamp the justification at this time on this contract.
That's the normal process, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes, I just want to clarify that.
Go ahead, Vice.
So for an independent services contract, a sole source contract that comes in to you, do you have to stamp every page? And is in that justification letter that you receive on this particular contract, isn't that a part of the whole packet?
No, I do not have to stamp all the pages. They are just the justification.
But you would consider the letter to be very much a part of the packets, right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Because it was based on this letter that you proceeded
That's
to
correct.
approve this contract.
That is correct.
All right.
Thank you, Vice. I think it's important to note that procurement and supply and finance and all the other signatories to any contract do have a rigid system of reviews. And normally when a justification comes in, a contract is not yet prepared. And so approval of the contract at a subsequent time, I don't think can be viewed as an approval of the justification. You first approve the justification, and then subsequent to that, a contract is prepared, developed, routed, and then executed. Do you concur with that, Counsel? Or can I have your comments on that, Counsel?
Well, I was actually going to make a comment on another matter. I'm not sure I really have an answer for your last comment was.
You may go ahead.
But I would say that procurement and supply, as far as I understand, doesn't really have the resources to investigate to see if a justification, if what's included in a justification is true or not. It's more or less taken for granted, and if I'm incorrect here, Director Sablan, please tell me. It's more or less taken for granted that what's in the justification is true, and it's the job of the person making the justification to make the argument, an argument that corresponds to the sole source, what we're allowed to be a sole source contract. It's just not possible to actually see, is this the only person on the island who could possibly do something, or is this, would the Commonwealth really be in a bind if this person wasn't hired? It's just, I don't think we have the capacity to do that. We sort of rely on people making the justification to be truthful. And I have to say, over the last 6 months or so, I've had a role at procurement and supply, and you've seen many sole source contracts come through, many of which don't have any justification, and it has to be sent back and saying, sorry, we need a justification. See this provision of the regulations, or we say, no, that's not good enough to meet those requirements, and we send a letter back stating that. In this instance, there was a justification, and I think there was some reason to think that taking that justification letter at its face, for its face value, I think there was a fairly good rationale for signing off on it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that other aspects of the law are being met. And those aspects of the law are not within the purview of procurement and supply.
So noted. Mr. Kearney, is it? Since you're answering, Kearney, is it?
Yes, Carney.
In Chamorro, your name means meat.
Yeah, I took Spanish. Carne, yeah, carne asada, all that.
Right. Mr. Carney, I asked earlier what basis was the sole source justification approved under, and we thank you for providing us a copy of the contract, and you noted that it would fall under A3, which is legitimate for the process of obtaining needed critical infrastructure. In order to harden and enhance the capability of protecting critical infrastructure in the Commonwealth. Now that's a legitimate need. Unfortunately, the sole source justification, that's not what it's justifying, and that's why I'm trying to understand. You have the letter in front of you from the governor. and it really has to do with Mr. Adda's unique qualification. That was the justification, and because no one else in the Commonwealth has this distinct advantage. And of course the concern about potentially risking $90 million in federal funds was a justification. And that's why I was trying to get clarification whether the justification met the criteria, but that doesn't seem to be the case. If anything, I would think, and this is just, I wanted to hear what you thought about this, that there's another justification, and that would be for sole source 7B, I guess, pursuant to subsection A1, a written justification for sole source procurement shall be prepared by the official with expenditure authority and shall contain specific unique capabilities required. And that sounds more consistent with the governor's justification. Would it not, Counsel?
Yeah, I believe A1, I would also think that perhaps A1 is an argument for it. If Mr. Adda, during his time doing these services, had gained so much knowledge that he really was probably, and this is the governor's justification essentially, I think, that he's the best man for the job, and in fact, the only, as a practical matter, only person available for the job right now for us to go ahead and start, so that we don't, so that CNMI isn't not in risk of losing any money. I think perhaps A1 is also could be a justification.
Fair enough. Thank you. Nice.
I was just going to point out, Mr. Chairman, that 70-30.3-225A1 is
I think the Council just referenced that.
Yes, I was going to point that out.
Thank you. And that is consistent with what was just stated. Thank you. Representative De La Cruz, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sablan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, we've looked over the governor's letter addressed to you with regards to the sole source contract. Some of the words that he used were pretty much direct in that one of the requests that he made, and let me just state that out for the record. The governor stated that I would like to sole source the entire ARRA management to Mr. Adda. And then it goes on to say, should this be allowable, Mr. Adda will be required to establish a private firm in order to deliver the services. It is anticipated that Mr. Adda will take on the current employee base from the ARRA office. And then he went on to say, given the uniqueness and time sensitivity of the ARRA program, it does not serve in the best interest of the CNMI to competitively bid these services out. So again, I say it was a direct request that the sole source be approved by you. Mr. Sablan, I would like to ask, in sole sourcing contracts, what does the Procurement and Supply Office do to try and review, in other words, do its due diligence to determine that the requesting party has met the level of an emergency, risk, maybe losing funding assistance. What does the Procurement and Supply Office do to sort of do a review on the request and on the contract itself? Does it just receive the requesting party, such as the governor's letter, and say, okay, well, this seems like an emergency because it says that we may lose millions of dollars in ARRA funding? Is that how you look at the certain requests coming into you?
No, that is not. I don't think that is an emergency. But well, it is very important to the governor that we do not risk anything, losing the ARRA funding. And also he also states in his justification that other jurisdictions are sourcing out. So I believe his justification is okay.
So let me just clarify that. You said that this is not an emergency.
No.
Okay. Again, going back to my line of questioning with regards to procurement and supply doing its due diligence, did procurement and supply attempt to contact these federal awarding entities such as HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, such as EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Education, or DOE, and others, to find out if the situation at hand, can the CNMI be given some sort of a leeway, if you will, because we have no managers of these funds? Did the procurement office try to contact these federal government agencies to find out whether we risk losing these millions of dollars if we don't hire somebody 1 week from now, 1 month from now? Did the procurement office attempt to do such verifications from these federal agencies?
I'm sorry, Congressman Del Cruz. I do not have the capability or the resources to do all those things in my office.
Okay, Mr. Sablan, we read the Inspector General's office's report. I believe you were one that was interviewed by this office.
Yes.
We were reading the details of their investigations, and let me just read out